Ani Bojo, Darrel Manitowabi Dishnakaz. My name is Darrel Manitowabi. I am an associate professor of human sciences at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, and welcome to my presentation titled Minno Bamadswin, A Theory of Indigenous Health. First, a disclosure, I have no relationships with for-profit or not-for-profit organizations. Research overview. The objective of this presentation is to answer the question, what is Minno Bamadswin? And also add to an understanding of a theory of Indigenous health. The method that I will employ is a review of ethnographic studies on the Ojibwe Anishinaabeg and a review of dictionaries of the Anishinaabeg language, also known as Anishinaabemwin. And the implications of this is that it demonstrates a continuity and applicability of Indigenous knowledge in addictions health. And I'll give an example of Nandwe Mikan, which is a research project I'm currently involved in. First, the definition. So where do we find the word Minno Bamadswin? The first documentation of this is in a dictionary by the Slovakian missionary Frederick Baraga. Baraga undertook missionary work in northern Michigan, Ontario, Minnesota, and Wisconsin in the 1830s. And based on this, he writes a dictionary of the Ojibwe language. And under the word health, he lists these terms: Gananda Wesuwin, Minno Oyawin, Minno Bamadswin. He doesn't list the definitions in that term. However, if you scroll through his dictionary, you find that the word nanatawin, which is a root word of that first term, means repairing, correcting, reparation, improvement, arrangement for a better life. A simpler definition that I list here is being healed. The word Minno Ayawin throughout the dictionary means in good health, comfortable, well off, and another definition that I provide is being well. The word Minno Bamadswin, which is the subject of this presentation, is listed as meaning good life, good health, good kind temperament, good humor, and an alternate definition that I provide is living a good life. Given that good living or good life is the common denominator, I next looked at what this means in the ethnographic literature. One of the studies that I consulted was W.J. Hoffman, who was a physician doing ethnographic work in Minnesota with the Ojibwe, and he speaks to Sagosaki, and Sagosaki talks about good living involving proper living, but also acknowledging that there's trials and tribulations, and one is beset with these temptations, and that may compromise healthy, good living. Mingos is another person who writes about this, and by way of his documentation in Densmore's ethnographic work in Minnesota. And Mingos tells the anthropologist Densmore that good living means it's part of a path in life, and in the path in life there are 7 temptations in one's life cycle, and life expectancy can be compromised by these temptations, and one must overcome these temptations to live a long, healthy life. The anthropologist Hollowell, who did work in Manitoba, Wisconsin, and Ontario, provides a more comprehensive understanding, and he provides a definition in the dialect that he records. The B is interchanged with a P. So Bamadswin means life in the fullest sense, life in the sense of health, longevity, and well-being, not only for oneself, but for one's family. The goal of living was a good life, and the good life involved Bamadswin. So the opposite then of good living is compromised living, and so I reviewed the sources to see what they have to say about this. Returning to Hoffman and Densmore, there's not a lot of detail. They talk about compromised living as being improper living and non-religious living. Jennis talks about Jennis, who is a Canadian anthropologist doing field work in Perry Island, also known as Wasauksing, records compromised living as comprising of sorcery in the community. There was a lot of ill behavior, ill health outcomes, and the explanatory model for this in the community was it related to sorcery. Individuals were practicing bad medicine on one another. And Jennis attributes some of this to the decrease in Indigenous social systems due to the colonization that was happening all around the community members, specifically the transition from Indigenous systems of understanding to non-Indigenous systems such as Christianity. Hollowell, again returning to him, he states that Bamadswin results in compromised relationships with animals, spirits, people, and that Bamadswin rests on a respectful relationship with these animate beings. And colonization, however, has compromised the health of the community, has led to poor mental health, and he also documents the addictions being a problem in the community at the moment that he's doing his research. In terms of a discussion, I was interested in comparing some contemporary documentation of this terminology, and a contemporary scholar who is exploring this is the Anishinaabe James Dumont. And Jim Dumont, who is a professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Sudbury, has written about Pamadzawin. And he states that Pamadzawin results from these root words, Bamadan, Mikana, and B refers to movement. Madan is life, and Mikana is a road or a path, and it also involves a Nadza, which is a behavior. And he states that one moves through 7 stages in life, in this path of life, and they involve the good life, the fast life, wandering, truth, planning, doing, elder as stages in one's life. And in this life, we move from an east to west trajectory, and it's from womb to grave. So I compared Dumont's and Nadza with what Baraga has to say, and Baraga writes behavior as meaning Ijawebzin Bamadzawin, which I've defined as being in a state of life. And Baraga also includes Inadzawin as a term that is related to behavior, and what I've listed here is that it means living. I've also consulted a contemporary dictionary, Marian Nakwagisha Corbier at the University of Sudbury, and Rand Valentine at the University of Wisconsin collaborated on an online dictionary. And under the term conduct, which is the closest that I could find to behavior, they list the word meaning nadze, which is again a continuation of this term. And they defined it as to live in a certain way, have a certain way of life, be of such character, conduct oneself in such a way. Now to conclusion and implications. So based on the review of the literature, it seems that Anishinaabe health refers to proper conduct in life, and that it essentially demonstrates that there exists an Indigenous healing modality that relates to how one conducts oneself in life. And also, I've shown in the research that I've conducted that there's continuity in practice. There's continuity with contemporary scholars that look at this term, but and also in the dictionary itself. I'm also involved in a research project that's titled Nandwe Mikan. And the reason why I've chosen this as an example is for the reason that Nandwe is part of that root word that Baraga originally wrote, and it refers to curing or healing or restoration. And Mikan is the word for road or path, and basically it's defined as curing path. And so we can see that there's a continuity in terms of these concepts that are applied to contemporary healing programs. And this particular healing program relates to opioid addictions and recovery that integrates cultural experiences on the land with clinical experiences. And future research, I hope to better understand explanatory models of Indigenous healing. So what are some foundational concepts that relate to Indigenous perspectives on healing? And furthermore, how is it possible to integrate some of these Indigenous healing concepts, this Indigenous knowledge, as a biocultural framework in Indigenous healing praxis? So basically, how do we effectively integrate Indigenous concepts into healing programs in a way that achieves the outcome, which is culturally relevant and culturally congruent healing? Here's my references, and me Gwetch for attending this presentation.